Hello, everybody. Talmidim Hayukorim. First of all, I want to commend this Hanacha's project. It's a tremendous idea to have Bochrim listen to the Rebbe's Fabrengens and then write them down. Being that I was Zeich and I merited to be a maniach, and I'll explain that word in a moment, as well as a chayzer, I would like to share some of my experiences that, with the objective to help you in your own process of doing these hanachas, and not just help you in the project, but also help you in your entire life, because you'll see it actually can transform your whole personality and your whole future when you know how to write a hanacha properly. I know those are strong words, but you'll see what I'm saying in a few minutes. So first of all, a little history. The word maniach, or hanacha, what does it mean? Hanacha means to place something down. You may know it from the halachas and Shabbos. There's hanacha and akara. Akara is to lift something, and hanacha is to place it down. So why do we call hanacha hanacha? Because we're placing down, we're committing to paper the Rebbe's words. So that was called hanacha. It was not born in this generation. Already in the time of the Alter Rebbe, you have hanachas. You may have heard of a sefer called Hanochas Harab. Hanochas Pinchas Rezes. He would write hanachas. A maniach is the writer of a hanocha. He's the one that places it. Hanocha is the product. So it's essentially and placing down on paper the words of the Rebbe and for posterity. So hanachas go all the way back from then. I would even say, I don't think they called them hanachas, but even the Baal Shem Tov, who spoke, the Baal Shem Tov did not write his Torah. The Baal Shem Tov spoke, so that would be technically a hanacha. Again, the name, I think, came in the time of the Alter Rebbe. I didn't do research on that. Same thing with Mezritcha Magid. The Alter Rebbe did write, he wrote Tanya, he wrote Shulchan Aruch, but most of the Alter Rebbe's memorim were hanachas, from either a Pinchas, as I mentioned, or the Rebbe Mittler Rebbe, or the Mariel, the Alter Rebbe's brother, or Rab Moshe. Sometimes we have 5 hanachas of the same maimer. The same thing with the Rabbeim after. The Rebbe wrote almost everything. There are also hanachas, but he wrote himself many of his own Teiras. Back going down, Tzemach Tzedek, the Rebbe Marash, the Rebbe Rashab, Frierdiker Rebbe, they wrote more than there are hanachas. The Rebbe and spoke much more than he wrote. He only once or twice began writing a shtickl maimer, and everything that the Rebbe delivered was hanachas by those that listened. It's called hanachas hashemim sometimes. The listeners wrote down what the Rebbe said. Now, the difference between a weekday and a Shabbos and Yom Tov is important to mention, because in the weekdays, of course, there were recordings. So you could listen to the recorder and write it down and prepare it for publication. Shabbos and Yom Tov, you needed another additional. It was called chazara, a chayzer. So chazara means to repeat. A chayzer is someone who repeats. I was also zeichet to be a chayzer and a maniach. A chayzer is someone who remembered almost verbatim what the Rebbe said, Shabbos and Yom Tov, when there are no tape recorders and no notes. And then I changed into a maniach after Shabbos, to then write it down and prepare for publication, and the Rebbe would edit it many times, the Rebbe would answer questions, and that's the hanachas. I want to add one more point in history. This is something many people are not aware of. This is not the first time in history that we had people who are manichim. Every one of you, every Jew on earth, grandparents and great-grandparents were all chayzerim and manichim. You've heard of the thing called Teda Shebal Peh, right? Why is it called Teda Shebal Peh? Because Teda Shebiksav, that we were received by Matan Teda in a few days from now, will be 3,332 years from Matan Teda. So Moshe wrote down Teda Shebiksav, what the Eibishter told him. But most of what Teda B'Pirusha Nitna, as the Rambam says, the Teda was given with commentary. What happened to all of that? That was Teda Shebal Peh. It was said Bal Peh, and as a matter of fact, you were not allowed to write it down. It had to be memorized. It was only Rabbi Yehuda HaNossi, close to 1,000 years later, who saw, together with his colleagues, that the Torah was being forgotten, the Torah Shebal Peh, that was memorized for years and years, that they decided to write it down, and that's what we call the Talmud, Mishnah and Gemara. So the truth is, Jews throughout history were memorizing, and then at some point wrote down what they heard. So let's bring it back now to the Hanochas of our time. I want to share with you what the key thing, the key secret. You know, people wonder, how could you remember verbatim hours and hours of the Rebbe's talks? Now remember, remembering was not just remembering Rashi Prakim, a few key points. It was remembering the details. So just to show you how difficult this was, when the Rebbe spoke, we know this from the weekday Fabrengens that were transcribed, that were taped and recorded. When you put it on paper, 1 hour of the Rebbe speaking yielded 20 pages, 8.5 by 11, double-spaced pages. So every hour was 20 pages. So imagine if I bring in 5 hours, not counting the Nugunim and the L'chaim and so on, that would bring 100 pages. There were Fabrengens that started on Shabbos 1:30. Oh, they all started 1:30. Sometimes went till 6:30, 5 hours. There were Fabrengens that went till 8 o'clock at night. Rare, but there were. That's how much is that? That's 6.5. That's 6.5 hours. Then there were Fabrengens on Simchas Torah. The Rebbe Simchas Torah was Thursday. There would be a Fabrengen Thursday night, Friday night, Shabbos day, and Shabbos afternoon before the Shkia. 4 Fabrengens before you could even begin to write anything. So we had to remember almost word for word, and we did a pretty good job. I'm saying with all humility, we did a good job. Like a Fabrengen, let's say 5 hours, 100 pages. We were able to get 98 pages without repetition. Pretty good. So there's a lot of secrets how to do that. I'm not going to go through everything. I want to talk more about the Hanocha part and how do you listen to the Rebbe and write it down, the key thing, accurately. You can write down a lot of things. It's not dafka, it's going to be accurate. Has to be maintain the integrity of the original. So I want to read to you, and this is something you could all look up. This is a maimer that everybody knows. You all know Bossi Legani, right? Tafshin Yud was the last maimer published by the Rebbe, the Frierdiker Rebbe's maimer, came out on Yud Shvat Tafshin Yud, the day of the Istalkus of the Frierdiker Rebbe. So this Hemshech, Bossi Legani, was the maimer that the Rebbe began the next year, Tafshin Yud Aleph, saying, and every year, the Rebbe would explain one of the 20 chapters in this Hemshech. So every year, every 20 years, it repeats itself, this cycle. And we learn it every year. So I want to read to you one parenthesis in the Maimed. I actually pulled it up here just for this purpose. And you'll see here is the secret to Chazara and Hanocha, which I think could help you in your work. And more importantly, understand the value of it, what it really means to be write down Hanocha. So I'm reading from chapter Vov, Perek Vov, in Bossi Legani, at the end of, close to the end of the chapter. I'm going to read it inside, and then I'll explain. The Frierdiker Rebbe writes following. Says like this, that a person who's a gas ruach, a balgaiva, a pompous, arrogant person, does not have a clay reikon, he doesn't have the bittel, so he doesn't have an empty keli. It's like someone with a full cup. You can't fill their cup is full already. Someone who's filled with themselves is not receptive to be able to receive any aid. So Bavar Pasha, a student, in front of a teacher, if he's so smart, and he thinks he's as smart as the teacher or smarter, or Bachlal thinks he's very smart, once you think you're very smart, you're not going to be open to hear any wisdom because you think you know it already. That's what he's talking about here. We'll move on, he says, Asher ena shaykh lekabel dvar Torah, a person that's arrogant. Since during his learning, he's a mitzias be'enei atzmei. He thinks he's a whole mitzias. He's a whole person with a whole ego and a personality. He thinks he's chashuv. So he's not bottle. If he's not bottle, he can't be receptive to learning. Then the Frierdiker Rebbe adds this in the parentheses. U'kamoi ha-talmid, like a student, asher be'eis hashpos harav, during the time when the Rav is being mashpia, the Rav is teaching, speaking. He's thinking and contemplating to understand what the Rav is saying, which seems to make sense, right? Why not? That's not the way to be. Be'emes and truth, tzarich be'eis ma'aseh rak kabel divrei harav. He has to only absorb and receive the words of the Rav, of the teacher. And afterwards, is beinin bedvar hasogas ha'inyan. And afterwards, he has to contemplate what it mean, what did he, to understand what was said. That's it. I'm going to stop here with that. Let me explain. Every intelligent person, when you hear an idea, the first thing is you try to understand it. And if you learned about it somewhere else, you connect it. I learned about it yesterday or 2 years ago and started. You're trying to understand it. The truth is, if you do that, you'll never remember what was said. You'll remember what you understood. And if you miss something, you won't have time to be able to understand it. I'll bring an example from the Gemara. In the Hilchos of the Halachos of Kashrus, of Treif, Treifus, there's a lotion about different types of food. There are foods that absorb taste and smell, and there are foods that exude taste and smell. So when you're busy absorbing, you can't be exuding. When you're busy, either the Torah lepolit le'mivla. When you're busy exuding, you can't be busy absorbing. In simple English, this is what it means. When you're in the middle of speaking, you can't listen. When you're listening, you shouldn't be speaking. If a person is speaking and listening at the same time, there's something wrong. When you're standing before or sitting before a teacher, Rav, you have to empty your mind and not try to understand what he's saying. You're trying to only do one thing. Not understand just the words that he's saying, even if you don't understand it. You know, you think about a dry sponge. A dry sponge, why does it absorb well? Because it's dry. If the sponge was wet, it wouldn't absorb. Young children remember very well the stories you heard, the olive base. Try teaching that to an adult, it's very difficult. Because they don't have the patience. Their mind is already too developed. The dry sponge, they don't have ideas developed yet. So they're much more, they're busy absorbing. So they're not exuding. So what does that mean? They're not being mashpia, they're being makabel. The challenge when the Rebbe spoke this, the Rebbe would speak very interesting ideas. And especially if you learned Nigla and Chassidus, you already understood some of them. So you begin to process. It's called process. You can't process when you're busy absorbing. The key to writing Hanacha, first the key to Chazorah, to remembering and then writing it accurately, is getting your mind out of the way. Now you'll say, it sounds strange. How could I get my mind out of the way? I need my mind to remember. No, you need your mind to process. You don't need your mind to remember. When you're learning something, don't try to understand what it says. Try to read what does the writer is trying to convey. Not my understanding of what he's saying. Pashat pshat. I have tried this exercise with many people. You read a page, and then you close the book or the sefer, and try to write down what you read. Most people will not be able to do so. You know why? Because they're going to write down what they understood, what they read. So the first step is like it says, Bereishis bara Elokim es hashamayim v'sa'aretz. What is the difference between how a chayzer and a maniach would read that posuk and a person who's processing? A chayzer and maniach would just hear the Eibishter says, Bereishis bara Elokim es hashamayim v'sa'aretz, and that's all they would repeat. Someone who's a bar seichel, who's trying to process, will say, what does Bereshis mean, and what does bara mean, and why is these words coming in that order? You're already going into a whole Havana. The first step is just to repeat what you heard. So the Rebbe said, today is this week, the Shavuos is coming in a few days. And I'm asking people to bring men, women, and children to go for Aseres HaDibros. So if you're a smart person, you start saying, why is the Rebbe asking that? What happened this year? What's this gula of Achdus? What happens when we listen to Aseres HaDibros? If you're doing that, you're not going to remember what the Rebbe said because you're busy with your mind processing what he said. All you have to do is come back and after Shabbos say, write down, the Rebbe said, men, women, and children should come shul Shavuos to hear Aseres HaDibros. The Rebbe's Heirah and Tov Shin Mem. I remember it like today because I heard it that way. You have to empty everything you know and just listen to the words. Now, that doesn't mean like you're a puppet or a machine. It means that you're focusing on what did the Rebbe say, not how I understood what the Rebbe said. Now, why is this so transformative? This is the art of listening. Most people do not know how to listen well. They listen half, 50%, 60%. Listening means completely focusing. You ever see the Rebbe by dollars or in pictures by Yechidus where someone spoke to the Rebbe and nothing else? The Rebbe had a big mind. He had a lot of people waiting to see him. But he focused completely and listened. And the best way you can prove that is, can you repeat what you just heard? If you can't repeat what you heard, you only listened halfway, and you were checking your text, or you're on the phone, then that's not Hanacha. So Hanacha meant, put yourself aside, complete derech eretz. You're listening to the Rebbe now. I often give shiurim. I give everyday shiurim. I give a share with many people. Now it's on Zoom. But often what happens is people, smart people, we read a line, they're right away giving pshat and they're explaining it and so on. And I say, let the Rebbe speak. The Rebbe in a maimer is the Rebbe speaking. Let first hear what the Rebbe says. When the Rebbe said a maimer or sicha, even if you had a question, you don't stop the Rebbe and say, hey, by the way, I don't understand what you're saying. First, listen to it all. And remember the example of the dry sponge. A dry sponge absorbs. A wet sponge, a saturated sponge does not absorb. And the reason this has the power, not just for good learning Torah, you avoid making mistakes this way. Very often when you try to process, you try to analyze something quickly, you make mistakes and you have to go back anyway. How often has it happened that you try to understand something and then you go back and see, I didn't understand the pshat in the first place? You have to be patient. To give you another two examples. One is from a judge and a jury. Someone goes to a din Torah. So there's a bezdin, even in the secular courts. And there's two sides. There's a plaintiff and there's a defendant. And they both have arguments. The prosecution and the defense arguments argue. They bring witnesses, they bring evidence, eidim, everything. When the judge and the jury, or the judge is sitting and listening, you don't want the judge, then suddenly a persuasive witness comes by. And he's very convincing. He tells the story and you say, wow, that really sounds like it happened. You don't want the jury to say, why not? Because there's other evidence. Maybe there are other witnesses. So the first step they have to do is just absorb information. If they, chaz v'shalom, come to maskona before they heard all the edim, all the witnesses and all the evidence, that's hepech haTorah. So that's why they're only doing is lemivla. They're absorbing, they're not polit. Then after they hear all the information and all the evidence, they can sit down and be shakel and weigh which evidence sounded more persuasive and there's evidence that contradicts and sort it out. That's a perfect example of step one, absorb. Step two, process. Another example is research. If someone asked you, go research, I want to hear the dinim of Shvuah Shechol Liyas B'Shabbos. This year, Shvuah is Shabbos. What are the dinim? What are the specific dinim? So what would you do? Open up a sefer or svarim. You look at Shulchan Aruch. You look in the Mekayles, the reasons. You look at these malaktim, the different people who gather different. You make research. You do research. You're not going to write a maskana, a conclusion, until you read everything about it, right? If somebody reads a few things and they say, oh, I know what to do, 1 second, you didn't finish reading it all. So step one is research, is just gathering information. It's called gathering facts, fact-finding. What's going on? And then you could say, after I have all this information, now I can process. That's what the Frierdiker Rebbe means here. That when you're sitting b'fnei harav, klei reikon, you have to empty and just listen closely. With bittul. And it's simpler than you think. You just have to get yourself away from it. Don't try to understand. When you're going to be listening to the Rebbe on different recordings to write Hanacha, you want to know the success of your Hanacha will be in direct proportion how well you listen, not how well you write. It's going to come down to this. Can you just listen and just put aside what you learned, even if the Rebbe says something about an inyan you learned in Chassidus or Nigla or elsewhere, put it all aside. Just try to concentrate. What is the Rebbe saying now? As if you're a child. Put away all your intelligence, as if you're a child, and then write it down, you'll see you'll write much better. Afterwards, once it's written, and once you've absorbed it that way, it's another story. Then you could sit and learn. Today, I learned Sichos and Maimonim that I had the schus to write. I learn it, I study it, and then you can process. But if you start processing before you absorb, you'll never absorb properly. And the lesson in life, I want to tell you all, is it helps in every area of life. How you communicate with people, how you're sensitive to other people's needs. How often does somebody have a problem and they tell it to you as a chaver? And you dismiss it. You say it's not a problem. You're not listening to the person's pain. How often do we share something with someone and we don't feel that they're sensitive to us because they're not listening well? Listening, remember, is not hearing. We're not talking about a tape recorder that hears words. Listening means absorbing, feeling what another person is experiencing, putting yourself in their shoes, not in your shoes. It helps avoid being judgmental, judging another person. It helps in relationships of all sorts between children and parents, between parents and children. One day, Mitzvah Hashem, when you get married, between spouses, between friends, and even between people who don't agree. Can you listen to someone you don't agree with? You don't have to agree with them, but at least you have the derech eretz and respect. You know why Hillel, the halacha is like Hillel, not like Shammai? They were both great Talmidei Chachamim, scholars, because Hillel would present Shammai's words before his own. Even though he was strong with his opinion, he would present Shammai's words in full glory. That's a very hard thing to do. When you disagree with someone, it's very hard for you to present their case. They present their case, and then you argue with them. Hillel had the amvison. He was a bottle. His bitl allowed him to put himself aside, hear another opinion, say it, and then say, that's his opinion, and here's what I have to say. That's bitl. And that's why the halacha is like him. Bitl is a beautiful thing. Why is the halacha like Hillel? The halacha should be like the one who has a better case, has better proofs, articulates it better, because bitl creates honesty. If you're able to say an opinion that's not yours, that means that you're not lying your negiah, your sheikhid, your bias, in the way. You're able to hear another opinion. It helps in every area. Ahavas Yisrael, Achdus Yisrael is all about that. That even if you disagree with someone, you still love them. We're just coming from Rish Chodesh Sivan and we're going to Matan Torah. And Rachmana litzlan, the Talmidei Rebbe Akiva were all brilliant scholars, but they could not listen to each other. So this is not just how to write Hanacha, which is also a big thing. This affects your entire life. It teaches you how to listen. In this case, to listen to the Rebbe, absorb what the Rebbe says like a svug. Svug is a sponge. You absorb it like a dry sponge, and then you can process the rest of your life. But the first step is that. And there's much more to be said on this topic. I thank you for the honor to be able to share. You're all young bachrim. Your minds are fertile. Your minds are hopefully still not saturated with all kinds of ideas, even good ideas, and that you're able to put it aside and listen and be true manichim and do justice to the integrity of what the Rebbe is. So when you go out on any shlichus or mivtzoim or any pool, saying wrong words, you're not mixing ideas. You use your seichel to communicate correctly to the right person. But spirit and the integrity is the original. That's the key. To be the Rebbe's mouth, not to be our own mouthpiece. What was Moshe Rabbeinu about? Moshe said, "Lo ish dvarim anech." No words. Aral svasayim, kvad loshen, kvad peh. The Eibishter said, "Mi sam peh la'adam." Who gives a man a mouth to speak? I do. I want you to be my mouthpiece, my voice, not your own. Moshe was the ultimate chezer maniach because he was only. That's why we trusted. He didn't mix his own thing. And we all have to be that, to have that ability to put ourselves aside and communicate what the Rebbe is saying. We have to use the seichel, like I said, to know how to say it, but if not miskabel, in a way that people can hear it and appreciate it. You don't teach a 5-year-old like you teach a 30-year-old. But the truth of the message, the spirit is the same. The only difference is you need the right aces for each age group and for each particular audience. So the Eibishter should bless you all to be true manichim and true, good Hanochas, and let the Rebbe's words become your own, that your language and your thinking and your approach to things should be an extension of the Rebbe. That you can represent well whatever the Rebbe wants, his kavanah, his rotzen, his shlichus, his heiros, directives, his teres, all flowing through you as if the Rebbe is speaking, but you are the one that's translating it in the right way. And the Eibishter should bless you all with hatzlach in this. As I said, it'll be hatzlach in every part of our lives. And we should already be zeicha, even before Matan Torah, to hear Torah Chadosh Amiti Teitze from the Rebbe. And I should be able to go back to my original job of being a Chazer and Maniach. It's been a long time. And all of us should be able to chazer and commit to paper and commit to others and repeat to others the Rebbe's words. Should be all Kabbalah Satera B'Simcha B'Pnimius. Shukayach to you all.
Amen.